Hi, I'm Allie Miller, and I'm really excited to talk to y'all about one of my favorite young adult books of all time. Actually, one of my favorite books of all time, period. Um, I grew up on the Chronicles of Narnia series by C.S. Lewis, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is just an absolute classic and might be my favorite of the bunch. So I have here on this slide a couple of beautiful covers of the book that I think really capture the sense of magic and wonder of the novel. And from the covers you can see that one, lions are really important in these books. They're on all of the covers. And in the center of the cover you can really see that Lewis uses classical mythology. So that would be mythology from like Greek and Roman times in his world building. And here are some illustrations from my copy of the book. There's a Disney movie out that's a pretty good adaptation, and I considered using images from the movie, but I think these pictures do a better job of capturing the whimsy and the magic and just the feel of the book. And I think the book is strong enough to stand on its own without the movie to support it. So the book opens with the Pensivy family children leaving London during World War I because there were air raids and it wasn't safe for them. So they had to go stay with an old professor in a big country house. Peter is the oldest. Susan is the most skeptical. Edmund feels really overlooked, kind of like a middle child. And Lucy is little, the youngest, and she's really imaginative and honest. And so these kids end up discovering a whole other fantastical world. There are fawns and talking animals and like evil witches and magical items and a great battle and even a visit from Santa Claus, which is an interesting story choice, but in my opinion, it works pretty well. And my favorite of all, wise, gentle, and wild lion named Aslan, who might be one of my favorite characters ever written. So if that didn't convince you to read the book, this next passage hopefully will. The pictures aren't very good, but it's the best I could do. You can zoom in on that, I think, and read it, or you can just keep listening to me as I read it out loud. But the context from this passage that I'm going to read is that the kids are all really bored in this giant country house that they've moved to, and they're playing hide and seek. There's a lot of like antiques and things around. And so they go into this random door, and there's nothing in it but a really old wardrobe, like a little closet that you hang coats and stuff in. And so everybody else leaves, but Lucy stays and decides to make the wardrobe her hiding place. So I'm going to start reading from the second full paragraph on the left page. This is Lucy. Looking into the inside of the wardrobe, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it was very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers, but she could not feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder is that more mothballs, she thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very queer, she said, then went on a step or 2 further. Next moment she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. Why, it is just like the branches of trees, exclaimed Lucy. and then she saw that it was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at night time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it was a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood towards the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it, and found it was a lamp post. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp post in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her, and soon after that a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamp post. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upwards he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first, because it was neatly cut up over the arm that held the umbrella, so as to keep it from trailing over the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella, in the other arm he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked as if he had just been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Good gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. So, really, as I mentioned before, I love these books. My siblings are a lot older than me, and I grew up reading them from a big paperback collection like this one, except it was so careworn that the front and back covers were missing. They just ripped off from being read so many times. My sister has that old family copy, but I asked for this new one for Christmas, actually, this past year. Um, it's kind of hard to overestimate the impact that this book had on me as a kid. The sense of adventure, the imagination, the relationship and love between the 4 central siblings, the kindliness and power of Aslan. This story is about sacrifice and love and good versus evil, and really, what could be better than that? So, if you haven't read the book, then I hope that you will give it a try. Thank you.